Hi everyone, welcome to this week's video on biblical interpretation and biblical scholarship. This week we're going to be looking at cultural criticism, and this is a very short video for a couple of reasons. Number one, I know you have midterm exams to work on, and second, I think this is actually one of the easier methods, if you want to call them that, of biblical criticism to understand, but it may be also something that you're not used to seeing or used to doing. So it's easy once you get it, but it might not be something you're familiar with. So it's worth spending a few minutes talking about that. So one of the first things I will point out is that what the Yi text refers to as cultural criticism is much more commonly known as reception criticism, or sometimes reception history, or a reception history approach to the Bible. So if you see those two terms, reception criticism or reception history, they are also talking about cultural criticism. These are interchangeable terms. And this is actually, I should let you know, it is a thing in biblical studies, and I would say it's becoming even more popular, and more people are devoting time to this particular approach to interpreting the Bible. You may find it useful, you may not, but it's good to know that it's out there, and if it comes up in your reading some other time in your life, that you sort of know what people are doing with this. So what does cultural criticism do? Excuse me. It uses particular cultural artifacts that interpret the Bible. So what I mean by cultural artifacts, scholarly commentaries, paintings, stained glass, sculpture, film, music, children's literature, could really be anything. And they observe how the interpretation changes over time. So you look at a particular, I would say, object, or maybe a few objects, and maybe you want to just study paintings. So you look at paintings, you look at how paintings have portrayed a particular event in the Bible and how those portrayals have evolved or changed over time. Or you might look at a different project, might be scholarly commentaries of the 19th century. So, and how they looked at, I don't know, one particular event in the Bible, one particular text, and looked at how that changed or developed over a period of time. Or you could take several artifacts from a particular period of time and divide it up that way. So there's different ways of doing this, but they're looking at basically how interpretation changes and then trying to figure out why it changes. So there's much less focus in this approach on the original meaning of the Bible. And in this class, we spent quite a bit of time, particularly on what I would call social scientific methods, to try to get at least a little bit better grip on Israelite culture. So Israelite culture helps us find out something about or hopefully it does, help us find out something about the original meaning of the text, or how the Israelites might have thought of their own text. So in this approach, in contrast, we have a much greater focus on what people do with the Bible. So we assume they have the Bible, and we're looking at what they do with the Bible that they have. Another way to think about it is they're not so interested with the world behind the text, but it's much more about the afterlife of the Bible and the world of the readers of the text. So they're really focused on readers. There was a theorist in the 20th century, literary theorist by the name of Paul Ricoeur, who divided it up this way, and I don't know if it was necessarily him that came up with this idea, but he talked about the text, so the world of the text, and the world behind the text, meaning the world that produced the text, and then the world in front of the text. So the world in front of the text is you and me, and all of our ancestors and our descendants, I suppose, that are interested in the Bible. So that's the world in front of the text, and that's definitely the focus of cultural criticism. Again, it tracks how interpretation changes over time, and it also attempts to explain these changes. So here's where the cultural criticism comes in. And usually, what people will argue is that the approaches that people use to the Bible, or the way they view the Bible, is a reflection on something broader that's going on in the culture. So when I was a graduate student at UC Berkeley, I helped teach a class called The Bible in Western Culture. And we looked at how the Bible, how really the first several chapters of Genesis have been interpreted over from the time of Jesus until the present day. So a long sweep of history. And it was a very interesting course, and it indeed helped show me that the way we look at the Bible is very reflective of the way that we look at our world. And I guess from a religious perspective, it also shows how the Bible has been able to speak to many different types of cultures over a very, very, very long period of time. So that's also, to me personally, very interesting. It also reminds us that interpretation is culturally relative. So the way we look at the Bible is widely shaped by the culture that we're brought up in. So there's other approaches that we've talked about in this course that do that same thing. We have to be cognizant of where we stand within the culture, our position of power or authority or lack thereof, and really our interpretation can be very much shaped by the culture that we live in. And what it also does is it invites some skepticism about discovering the one true interpretation. So, unless you really are very much a positivist about the fact that biblical scholars will ultimately discover the one true interpretation of any verse or every verse in the Bible, it shows how the interpretation of the project of interpretation ebbs and flows over time. And if you remember way, way, way back at the beginning of the course, I talked about a guy by the name of Spinoza who sort of kicked off the modern study of the Bible. And he was completely convinced that if we learn enough about Hebrew and we read close enough and we study the Bible hard enough, that one day we will scientifically discover the one true interpretation of the biblical text. And I would say these days, looking at the broad scope of history and everything else, people are much less accepting of that idea and are much more skeptical that we can discover the one true interpretation, or even that there is just one true interpretation of every text in the Bible. So you can do with that what you will, but I think that sort of gives you an outline of what is going on in this chapter by Professor Dunn. So take a look at that. If you have any questions, be sure and let me know. Like I said, I think it's fairly easy. But again, concentrate on your midterms this week. I hope you do well. Feel free to collaborate with other people in the course. And best of luck, and work hard and do well. And we'll see you later on. Talk to you soon. Bye.